Joining me now is political commentator Jessica Burbank. Democrat Rep Maxine Waters is calling for the 25th Amendment to be used against Trump. Have a look.
It is time to call for Article 25 of the Constitution of the United States of America to determine his unfitness, to determine that something's wrong with this president.
Isn't it a bit ironic for the Democrats to be calling Trump unfit when they had a barely conscious Joe Biden in the White House for the last 4 years? In fact, this was her just over a year ago, last July, talking about why she was such a strong Biden backer.
I believe that he believes that he can do the job. I believe he has been fair, not only with the Black community, but with the people of this country.
Isn't this just the height of hypocrisy?
I don't know if Maxine Waters was close enough to the White House to know what Biden was doing then. I do know that many people had taken meetings in the White House ahead of the debate, ahead of the typical primary season here in America, and they did not decide that Biden was unfit to run, despite observing he was unfit to run. I remember that night of the debate, I said, we haven't seen Joe Biden speak for longer than a few minutes. We genuinely don't even know if he can complete a sentence. And that night, we were surprised, some of us, to see that he couldn't. But yeah, I think that the call's coming from inside the House. Maxine Waters herself is 87. Our Congress is incredibly old. There's been a reluctancy to let new voices lead. And I think the Democratic Party really needs to do that. That being said, if he's unfit, he should be out. But it is a little bit difficult when you sort of let Biden run again and us blow right through the primary season, even though he was unfit for office. So I really wish we had someone who was calling for him to step down delivering this message.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I want to turn to New York now. New polling suggests Andrew Cuomo could beat Mamdani if the other candidates in the race dropped out. Cuomo would beat Mamdani 52% to 41%. But at the moment, doesn't seem like they're going to be pulling out. So how do you see this race playing out?
Yeah, I'd have to see the polling to see the margin of error and see who they talk to. We've seen polling be incredibly wrong in the United States because typically they're calling landlines. And not only do people not have landlines, people don't answer the phone. And the type of person to answer the phone to a random number is a specific kind of person. And I think we've got to be careful about how much we learn about the race from these numbers. We've really got to dig into how they're done. So I'd have to see the poll to comment on that specifically. But I really think Zoran's bottled lightning. We saw thousands of people show up to a scavenger hunt. It was not even a political action day. It was just a fun event with Zoran. So liking Zoran is something that's become sort of a movement more than just a campaign. And you know, he's someone that's running on progressive policies when America's more expensive than ever, when we've seen rent go up time and time again and median income not be enough to get by in New York or most cities in America. And to have someone speak to that means he's reached people all across the country, not just in New York. Cuomo being soft on a lot of those issues, I think has set him up to fail.
Look, Zoran Mamdani previously called for New York to defund their police. He now seems to be backtracking, and he's actually tried reaching out to them to, I guess, win their votes. But is anyone actually falling for this? You can just go through his Twitter to see years of progressive talking points, particularly around police. How is this actually electable in New York when crime is such an issue?
I think Mamdani is incredibly electable in New York, specifically because crime is an issue. We've seen police budgets be doubled with additional costs. Right now, the New York City police budget is $5.8 billion, with projected spending at $11 billion due to increased incurred costs. So lawsuits, incidental expenses, overspending. It's ridiculous. And we're seeing homicide clearance rates drop during COVID. Now they've recovered, but we still see homicide clearance rates at about 80% for white people and 53% for Black people in New York. So there are some racial issues in the policing system still. Zoran's always been vocal about that. That disparity needs to be addressed. And as far as I'm concerned, when we're seeing this much spending on police and only 40% of major crimes getting solved, we've got to think a little bit differently about how we keep people safe and how we address crime in a city like New York. Are we going to, instead of sending someone who doesn't have a law degree with a gun to a house to respond to a mental health crisis, when we could instead be sending someone who's a social worker, someone who's a psychiatrist who could diffuse that situation where there's not a crime being done, but help is needed? And so I think it's good that he's thinking creatively about these ideas, but I think he understands very well that the defund the police message didn't communicate exactly what I just described. People instead imagined like a GTA lobby becoming of New York, just people running around committing crimes, a lawless wasteland. And so I think he's right to say, you know, this title didn't describe the policy accurately. So we should call criminal justice reforms that are progressive something else.
But at the same time, I really understand the argument that for the last 10 years, New York has been run by Democrat mayors. So if there are issues with things like rental availability, policing, and then you say, well, we want to break the system. Isn't the system Democrats running the city? So wouldn't the alternative be to elect a Republican or a conservative mayor instead of lurching even further to the left and essentially doubling down on failure?
There's a big difference, I would say, between someone like Zoran and your standard establishment Democrat like Cuomo, like Eric Adams. Someone like Zoran is not afraid to talk about working people's wages being low and wanting to invest in worker power. When Cuomo's having fundraisers with major corporate donors and rubbing shoulders with the elites at parties, he's not going to be thinking about the little guy in New York, no matter how many times he delivers that message scripted for him in an ad. Someone like Zoran, who stood up and joined the taxi cab workers on a hunger strike when Bloomberg raised the price of a taxi medallion to $1 million. That's someone who understands the fight for working people. So I don't see the only alternative to these establishment Democrats as conservatives or Republicans. We have a whole host of political ideas. And sometimes when you go further to the left, it doesn't mean being more of a Democrat. It means different ideas entirely. And that's really what Zoran brings to the table. It's not just different policies, but actually a different mentality when it comes to governing and delivering on promises for working people.
Very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how the race plays out. But I want to bring your attention to Julia Roberts' new film, After the Hunt. It was screened at the Venice Film Festival this week, and it's received backlash from some sections of the left-wing media. Apparently, attendees complained that it revives old arguments about women making false allegations of sexual assault. But Julia Roberts said, that's the point. Let's spark a conversation. And the tagline of the movie poster says, not everything is supposed to make you feel comfortable. So why is it that some topics are totally off limits and we can't even talk about them? I thought the left did stand for freedom of speech.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie. I've got to see the movie to understand what they're talking about. But I think Julia Roberts, in saying, you know, I'm not going to directly speak on this, was merely her saying, you know, the art speaks for itself, which I totally understand. You put a message in a movie. If every person who made a movie said, this is why I made the movie, because this is what I want you to think, going to the movies would be incredibly boring. So I'm glad she didn't say anything about it, actually, and let the film speak for itself. But as far as, you know, sparking a conversation, some members of the left aren't all of the left, just like some members of the right aren't all of the right. I think there's a group of insufferable people that are across the entire political spectrum that will find something wrong with everything. And I call these people the miserable. And they're not principled. They don't care about free speech. They just want to find something wrong with everything they see. And that's how I would categorize these people. I think it's important to have these conversations around sexual assault because it's still a problem today that women do not believe other women when cases of sexual assault and allegations are brought forward. And so we've got to get to a place where we're engaging with each other in good faith and we're looking for evidence and people are allowed to have free conversations about some of these extremely difficult subjects. Do I expect Julia Roberts to be a thought leader? No, I expect her to be a movie maker, and that's enough for me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jessica.
Yes, thanks for having me.